One of the things that I often hear people say if you say, well, we think that, Jews, Palestinians, Israeli Jews should live together equally, as you know, the common response from many Jews is this would be an Islamic dominated state. And all the minorities, the Jews and the Christians, would all be oppressed. And they say, look at the Christians in Iraq, look at the Christians in Egypt. They're in Muslim majority societies, they're never treated equally. They'll always be oppressed. And so I'm curious how you respond to this argument, which I often hear, which uses not just the experience of Jews in the Middle East, but also the experience of Christians in the Middle East, to say that the result of one equal state would be a Muslim majority state that oppressed everybody else.
I mean, why do we always have to point to and then exaggerate the worst example and think this is the norm? Look at Jordan. You know, people are doing well there. It's not a religious state, but people are religious. They're devout, even I would say the royal family is. Christians are well treated, Christians are respected. So why can't we point to Jordan as an example? At the same time, let's remember that over the years, and I'm not pretending that things were perfect, but over the years, Christians, Jews, and Muslims find ways to coexist in this land and in this region. In fact, when Jews were persecuted by Europe, Christians, many times, they found it safer to be in under Islamic rule. And again, I'm not saying things were perfect. I know, uh, there were challenges sometimes, there were better historical times than other times. And so why can't we point to times when things actually worked and say we can do them? Or why can't we point to good examples and say we can actually do it? And in fact, I would say come to Palestine, come to Ramallah. Christians make what, 5 to 10% of the population of the city of Ramallah. Today, Ramallah is the political capital of Palestine. We still think Jerusalem should be, it's another thing. But when we talk about Ramallah, where the Palestinian Authority is, where all the NGOs are, the mayor is Christian, you know, and this is a custom, this is a status quo. And no one objects. Everyone elects between the Christian nominees because historically Ramallah has been a Christian town. And so is it in 10 Palestinian towns and villages across the West Bank, where even when the majority, Christians are not a majority. The mayor of Bethlehem is a Christian. The mayor of Beit Sahur is a Christian. You look at the Palestinian fabric, the political fabric, you always find Palestinian Christians in the Palestinian Authority or historically in the PLO or in the negotiations. So look at us, we're doing well, we have structures, we have schools, in one of, in our Lutheran schools, we have, I'm in Ramallah now, one of our Lutheran schools, what I think 80% of the students are Muslims, 20% are Christians. We read a Bible verse every morning, before we go to class. No one objects. Once a month, we bring the Christians and the Muslims together in the religious education class just to talk about common ethics between our faiths, to talk about the history of the two faiths, to say, this is what Muslims believe, this is what Christians believe, this is where we disagree, but this is where we agree. We have to respect one another. So even in Palestine, come and look at the way Christians and Muslims have been living. And again, it's not perfect. Nowhere it's perfect. We should always strive to make things better. But to create this monster and fear and say, hey, look at how things can develop, and then everyone is afraid from that. And because of that, I mean, so let's continue what I guess oppressing Palestinians. Really, is that your solution? Is that your proposition? I mean, it definitely doesn't make any sense, and I think it's clearly an excuse to continue the current status quo of oppressing Palestinians. You know, and I see this today. Even in different ways. I was listening to a conversation between an American Zionist and an American pro justice, pro-Palestinian activists. It's, well-known figures, by the way. And the pro-Palestine is a woman, and the Zionist was asking her, would you go without a hijab and walk in the streets of, I think, Lebanon or Gaza? And the question, with all due respect, is stupid. I mean, what is the logic behind your question? So because women must wear hijab in Iran or in Gaza, that's therefore we can bomb them and besiege them and sanction them? Really? And you claim to be on a higher moral authority than everyone else. So it doesn't make sense, Peter, when people ask this question and then use it as a way of legitimizing oppressing other peoples.
Yeah. Um, You mentioned very early at the beginning of the conversation the idea of nonviolence and how you drew that on that tradition from reading Martin Luther King and the Bible. But if I imagine, but there are also people that we revere now, like Nelson Mandela, who gave up on nonviolence and who said that there was a need for armed resistance. So I'm curious, what do you say to Palestinians who come to you and say, nonviolence has not worked. We should have the right. We should be able to practice armed resistance. I mean, I think like you, I'm opposed the idea of targeting civilians, but there are people who might say we have the right and to armed resistance, and that nonviolence hasn't worked for us. So, what do you say to those
Yeah.
people?
So I think even armed resistance is part of the international law, and Palestine and Palestinians who live under occupation are mentioned as that. So yeah. Here is what I would say. Um, yes, we've tried nonviolence, we tried diplomacy, and it didn't work. But we've also, the same could be said about trying violence. Um, the problem with nonviolence is, to me, first of all, it's a principle. I am a principled person. I think, the Bible is clear. Violence should be the last resort, if even an option. And then, in some Christian traditions, there is a reference to the just war theory, in which, when is violence justified, or when is violence or sanctified, and it's justice to use violence. And by the way, even the Pope recently said that theory is outdated. And I think he recognized what we've been saying actually for years, which is, where do you draw the line? Uh, you know, uh, how can you make sure that you're only targeting militants? Who's a militant and who's not? And violence, human experience tells us violence only brings violence. Violence by nature brings retaliation. It takes more courage, more sacrifice actually, to try nonviolence and continue to make sure that we don't create more circles of violence. And I'm not trying to, I don't lecture on Palestinians and say I am holier than everyone because I believe in nonviolence. But then even, violence has its laws. You can't attack civilians. And as we all know, it's really hard to just target militants and not civilians. The problem is that not Palestinians have not tried international nonviolence. I think the problem is with the international community and the hypocrisy and double standards of the international community. And I think if we emphasize that enough, create more grassroots movements around the world to make sure, we have enough mobilization for creative nonviolent resistance, I think we can make a difference, because nonviolence does not depend entirely on the Palestinians. It needs to be a global effort if we believe we are one family. And that's why I've been very vocal, and I never shy from the idea that I think the way forward cannot but go through boycotting and sanctions and isolating Israel until it abides with the international law. I don't see any other way. Um, as long as Israel feels it's above the international law, never held accountable, nothing will change. So if we have enough pressure from people on governments to change this reality, then nonviolence will work. And, so it's not entirely as if Palestinians have not tried nonviolence. And I know that these ideas are not very popular in the Palestinian community. I speak a lot in events. I always, and the main thing that people challenge me with, by the way, here in Palestine, when I speak, is my firm belief in nonviolence.
uh, uh,
And I tell them, first of all, I don't have an option. I think this is what Jesus taught us. So, but I think it can work. I'm convinced it can work. And at the same time, let's be honest, uh, violence will only bring more violence. Uh, and, you know, every life matters, Peter.
yeah,
Every life matters. And we have to find ways. And I don't want to believe that the only way for peace to come is if one side eliminates the other.
yeah.